One stormy night, I sat in front of my old computer and stared at the almost forgotten social media sales post on the screen. The only light in the room was the faint glow of the computer screen, which reflected a pale blue color in my eyes. I was selling a set of barbells, a set that had accompanied me through countless lonely nights. Outside, the sound of the wind accompanied by raindrops tapping on the window seemed to remind me that nothing that happened in this town could escape the elements. My thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of a message notification on my computer screen. A message from a buyer named Joe. "Still selling?" I quickly replied, a flicker of anticipation welling up in my mind. I sensed an unusual tension in my exchange with Joe. His messages were short and to the point, with no unnecessary nonsense. Whenever I tried to find out more about him, he always skillfully evaded. Finally, we agreed on a time for the transaction, and Joe would pick it up at midnight. This appointment added to the uneasy feeling in my heart, but I didn't back down. I needed to sell the barbell set, not just for the money, but to get rid of the memories of the past. However, when the night of the deal came, everything became more eerie. The sky was filled with dark clouds, as if to foretell something ominous that was about to happen. I stood by the window, looking through the rain-blurred glass at the empty street. At midnight, a black sedan slowly drove into my sight. The car pulled up outside my house, but there was no movement in the car. I tried to call Joe, but the call was quickly disconnected. Immediately afterward, I received a message on my cell phone. "I'm outside, come on out." I gripped my cell phone tightly, my heart racing. A midnight visit from a stranger in this situation. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The cold wind mixed with rainwater slammed into my face. The streetlights outside were dim and uncertain, barely illuminating the black sedan parked on the curb. I stepped out the door, my mind on alert. I couldn't see who was inside the car, but I sensed an ominous vibe. "Joe!" I called out tentatively, my voice almost drowned out in the rain. The car door burst open and a tall figure stepped out of the car, wearing a baseball cap, his face obscured by the brim, making him difficult to recognize. He didn't say a word, just walked towards me, holding a crumpled bill in his hand. I instinctively took a step back, my heart racing. I noticed his hands, large and rough, with unusual black stains on the nails. He handed me the money and I hesitantly took it. The moment the exchange is made, I feel his fingers touch my hand, a cold, damp touch. "Where's the barbell?" He finally spoke, his voice husky and low. I pointed towards the garage and we walked together. Walking ahead, I felt a chill at the back of my head, seemingly locked in his gaze. In the garage, the barbell lay quietly in the corner, as if it were a witness to the chain of events. He began to examine the barbell while I stood watching his every move. He suddenly stopped what he was doing and turned to look directly at me. I saw his eyes. They were deep and empty eyes with no fluctuation of emotion in them. "You look familiar," he said suddenly. The words caused my heart to tighten, as if a chill had rushed up my spine. I tried to keep my composure, but found my voice trembling slightly. "Maybe you're recognizing the wrong person." He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me, then suddenly turned around and picked up the barbell, walking towards the car. I breathed a sigh of relief, but at that moment I heard a strange noise outside the garage. It was light footsteps accompanied by a rustling sound, like someone or something was stalking through the darkness. I turned to look toward the garage door, but all I saw was the rain-soaked street and the shadows of swaying trees. At that moment, I realized that the night's fears were far from over. My heart still raced as that buyer left. Those strange footsteps were keeping me from calming down. I decided to step out of the garage to check out what that mysterious sound really was. The rain mixed with the night wind was cold and harsh. I walked out into the street and the silence around me was suffocating. The houses on both sides of the street had their windows closed, as if everyone in the town was hiding from some unspeakable fear. I walked slowly, my own footsteps ringing in my ears from time to time. Suddenly, I felt something peering at me from the shadows. I looked back, but all I saw was darkness. My heart was pounding, and I felt that every step could be a step towards an unknown abyss. Just then I heard some sort of strange whispering sound. It seemed to come from far away, and as if it was right in my ear. The sound was both strange and familiar at the same time, and it evoked a fear buried deep in my heart. I stopped and tried to discern the source of the sound, but it seemed to echo all around me, making it impossible to localize. My instincts told me it was more than just the wind and rain at night. Something hidden in the nighttime colors of this town was waiting to be revealed. I returned home at a brisk pace, closing the door behind me and leaning in to catch my breath. But just when I thought everything had calmed down, I suddenly heard my cell phone ring. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Do you think it's over?" I stared at the message, an unaccountable fear welling up in me. This message, the bizarre events of this night, and the appearance of that mysterious buyer all seemed to imply that some kind of deep secret was slowly surfacing. I sat on the sofa, the ominous voices and the contents of the text message echoing in my mind. The storm outside seemed to be getting more and more ferocious, like a harbinger of the coming storm. And I knew that whatever this storm would bring, I had to face it and uncover the truth behind this chain of events. I spent a sleepless night haunted by that mysterious text message. Whenever the wind rattled the window, I would look out of it in terror, as if expecting or dreading the appearance of something. As the night wore on, I began to reflect on the series of events. The buyer named Joe, the mysterious text messages that appeared out of nowhere, the whispering in the night. Was it all just coincidence, or was there a deeper meaning hidden behind it? The next morning I decided to explore the truth behind these events. First, I tried to trace back Joe's messages but found that his social media accounts no longer existed. This discovery added to the doubts in my mind. I decided to ask people who had mutual friends with Joe. Perhaps they could provide some clues. However, when I contacted these mutual friends, they all stated that they did not know anyone named Joe. This made things even more confusing. Could it be that the buyer had been a phantom from the beginning, a fictional character in my mind? In a moment of confused thought, I suddenly remembered the whispering voice I had heard that night. The voice seemed to be leading me somewhere or warning me of something. As I tried to recall the details of that night, the voice seemed to be coming from the direction of the town's old library. I decided to go there to do some exploring. The town's old library had been abandoned for years, and only the occasional explorer or curious child would go there. As I walked into the outdated building, an indescribable feeling of dread filled my mind. The library smelled of dust and stale books, mixed with an indescribably grim aura. I walked aimlessly through the library until I spotted a worn diary in a corner. It seemed to have been forgotten for years, its cover covered in dust. I carefully flipped through the diary and found many strange events recorded in it, and a name called Joe that kept popping up. The diary describes a series of mysterious events and a horrifying legend about Joe. My hands trembled as I realized that all of this might not be a coincidence. That mysterious buyer Joe, this aged diary, and that text message may all point to a secret hidden deep within this town, and I, without realizing it, had become involved in the whirlpool of this secret. I held the diary tightly, my heart filled with uneasiness and curiosity. The legend about Joe in the diary seemed to be closely connected to everything I had encountered. According to the diary, Joe was once a resident of this town, but mysteriously disappeared on a stormy night many years ago and has been a legend in the town ever since. The diary mentions that every stormy night, Joe's spirit returns to the town in search of unfinished business. This story sounds like a fairy tale used by the old women of the town to scare their children. But in my mind, there was an uncanny connection between this story and the buyer I encountered. I began to wonder, was that buyer I encountered really Joe's spirit? Or was it just a coincidence? I decided to dig deeper into the legend. I visited the town's historical archives in an attempt to find more information about Joe. After a lot of hard work, I found some old newspaper reports about him. Joe turned out to be an ordinary guy who loved fishing, but he accidentally fell into the water during a night fishing trip and disappeared since then. As my investigation progressed, I felt more and more drawn to the story. The buyer that night, the mysterious text message, and the legend all seemed to be guiding me towards some unknown truth. But I also felt an unnameable fear that loomed over me like a shadow. Just as I was deep in these thoughts, my cell phone rang again. It was another text message from an unknown number. "You are close to the truth." This text message brought the fear in my heart to its peak. Could it be that someone had been secretly watching me all along, guiding me to the heart of this mystery? I decided to visit the lake where Joe had disappeared. Maybe there would be some clues to be found there. As I stood by the lake and looked at the sparkling water, a strange feeling came over me. It was as if the lake had some kind of magic that drew me closer step by step. Suddenly, I saw a vacuous figure on the water. The figure seemed to be beckoning, and I felt a wave of vertigo as I stared at it. I wasn't sure if it was my hallucination or if it was real. The reflection on the water twisted in the ripples, and the figure gradually became clearer, as if it were Joe's face. I crouched down and reached out to touch the cool lake water, my heart filled with doubt and fear. Just then, I heard a rustling in the grass behind me. I jerked around, but all I saw was emptiness. The sound of the wind from the lake mixed with the rustling of the leaves, making the whole scene seem even more eerie. I stood up and took deep breaths, trying to calm myself. Suddenly, I noticed some footprints in the dirt around the lake. The footprints looked fresh, as if they had just been left behind. I followed the footprints forward, my mind filled with curiosity and nervousness. The footprints led me to the front of a small cabin. The cabin looked very old, the windows were dusty, and the door was closed. I walked up to the door of the cabin, took a deep breath, and then gently knocked on the door. The door didn't seem to be locked and slowly opened. Inside the door was a dimly lit room filled with old furniture and some fishing gear. I stepped inside and tried to find some clues. Just then I saw a box filled with old items. Inside the box were some old photos of Joe and his family and some fishing photos. At the bottom of the photos I found a note. The note read, "There are some things that are never forgotten." I felt a chill run through me as I held the note. All these clues seemed to point to one fact. Joe's soul had never been able to rest in peace, and there was an unsolved mystery hidden behind his disappearance. I decided to keep digging into this mystery until I found the answer. I stood in the cabin, holding the note containing the unknown secret tightly in my hand. The air in the room seemed to freeze, and the silence around me was suffocating. I knew deep down that I was deep into a mystery that could change everything. I decided to leave this chilling cabin and return to town. On the way back, my mind kept replaying everything that had happened over the days, from the barbell sale at the beginning, to the appearance of Joe, the mysterious buyer, and now the cabin I found by the lake. It all seemed to be showing me a deeper truth hidden beneath the surface. When I got home, I decided to look through the old journal again, hoping to find more clues in it. As I flipped through the pages one by one, I found something shocking in the last few pages of the diary. The owner of the diary mentioned a ritual in the last few pages that seemed to be directly related to Joe's disappearance. According to the diary's description, the ritual needed to be performed on a specific night, and it had to be done at the same lake where Joe had disappeared. I suddenly realized that tonight happened to be that particular night. I felt an urge to go to the lake myself to see if anything supernatural could really be happening. With a touch of unease, I arrived at the lake. The lake looked extraordinarily dark at night, and everything around me was unusually quiet. I began to mimic the steps of the ritual as described in my journal. I wasn't sure if it would work, but my heart drove me to try. Just as I was completing the last step, a strange glow suddenly flooded the lake. I stared at the glow and felt an unspeakable power surge through the depths of the lake. Suddenly, I saw a figure slowly rise from the lake, and it was none other than Joe's face. His eyes were hollow and deep, and his body seemed to merge with the water. He looked at me, and his lips moved slightly as if he was saying something, but I couldn't hear any sound, and could only feel a strong transmission of emotion. Just then I felt a strong force coming out of the lake, and it seemed to be trying to pull me into the water. I struggled backward, my heart filled with fear. But the force was too strong, and I gradually lost the ability to resist. Just at the moment I was about to be dragged into the lake suddenly calmed down, the light disappeared, and the force dissipated. I dropped to the edge of the lake, gasping for air. I looked up and saw that the lake had returned to its usual tranquility, as if everything that had just happened was just an illusion. I slowly stood up, my heart filled with doubt and shock. What was the significance of all this, and had Joe's soul truly been freed? Or was this just the beginning of an unsolved mystery? I left the lake with these unsolved mysteries and deep confusion. The experience of that night was like a nightmare, deeply engraved in my memory, and the secrets of this town may never be fully revealed.